Hey, this is Bill from Calderwood Percussion. If you've been subscribed to our YouTube channel for a while or even just checked out some of our videos, you may have seen one we did a while back that illustrated a method for cutting and installing reinforcement rings in drum shells. That method involved just cutting a butt joint and pressing it into the drum shell and gluing it in place. Since then, I've experimented a fair amount and come up with a few new ideas on how to do it, and I want to show you a newer method that we've come up with that involves using scarf joints that I think works a little bit better. Right now we're working on a lot of things, but what's on the bench immediately is a full drum line of rope tension marching drums for Bath County High School in Kentucky. I figured I would take this opportunity to illustrate this new method we have for cutting re-rings. Well, new to us, I'm sure we're not the first people to do this, but basically what we want to do is begin obviously by cutting the re-rings that we're going to use out of shell stock. We've already done that here. If you're interested in seeing how to do that, that method hasn't changed from our previous video on re-rings, which you can find right here. The first thing is you need a pretty good sized crosscut sled for your table saw. And we're going to bring the blade up and set it at an angle. The angle in this case doesn't actually matter that much. I go for something in the neighborhood of 45 degrees, but the exact angle doesn't matter as long as it's consistent on both sides of the cut. So I'm not going to measure, I'm just going to tilt this over until it's somewhere around 45 degrees. And that looks like it'll do the trick. I'm going to lock that in place. Bring that blade down to a safer height. In order to maintain a consistent angle on both sides of the cut, we have to make sure that the ring is held at the same angle relative to the tabletop with each cut. And I'm just going to do that by taking a piece of scrap 2x4 here and making a stop block. So if I get in the ring here and see where I'm going to be addressing the blade, ideally I would like the surface of the table to be tangent, I guess, to the circle, so perpendicular to the diameter of the ring. And then I want to set the block so that it will hold the ring in place just like that. I'm going to clamp it with one of my handy dandy Bessie F-clamps. It's important to make sure that you're not putting a lot of pressure in between the face of the table and the stop block, because any amount of flex that you introduce into the ring over here is going to change the angle of the cut. Again, the angle of the cut doesn't really matter. All that matters is that both sides are the same, but if this is flexed when you cut, the likelihood of you matching that the next time around is pretty much non-existent. So as we cut, it's important to try and keep the ring held firmly in place, but not flexed anywhere. And also the side that is away from the stop block needs to stay pretty steady against the edge of the sled as well, because again, it's just about maintaining a consistent angle on both sides of the cut. So here we go. So now that we've done our first cut, we can take this over to the drum shell. This is the ring for the other side. I'll put that aside for now. We can take this ring over to the drum shell and do a test fit to get a sense of how much material we need to remove to get this ring to fit perfectly. Here's it lined up. I'll mark that with a pencil. I'm going to cut outside the line so that I can sneak up on it, but this gives us a good place to start. Okay, now, see how close we got. As you can see, it's pretty close, but not quite there. We need to trim off just a little bit more. So now that lays in there with no gaps at all, and the joint is about as tight as I think I could get it, we are ready to glue this in place. The reason why I was never really happy with the old method Well, there are a few reasons, really. For one thing, it's a lot easier to get this fit accurate. With the old method, you go back and forth with the belt sander a lot, and it was hard to really get it perfect. Even when you did get it perfect, that kind of brings us to the second issue. You really had to put a lot of pressure on the shell to get those to fit in, and so it was really kind of hammering away against a block, and that would cause a few problems once in a while. Occasionally I miss and chip out some ply, which I then have to fix. More importantly, sometimes I put a ring in and I felt like it was just too much pressure on the shell, and I was concerned that over time there might be issues of structural stability, or the ring actually possibly even pushing the shell out of round, which is pretty counterproductive. And then also the old way was super messy. We would, I'd wind up with a lot of glue on the outside of the shell, and even if you clean it up really well, you still run the risk of, if you have to dye the shell later, having spots where there's still glue in the wood and the dye won't take. So this way is still a little bit messy, but the mess stays almost entirely on the inside of the shell. So you clean it up as best you can, but if you miss some, not that big of a deal. So overall, this method just seems to work better. Alright, so when we put the ring in, I always try to line up the seam with the re-ring with the seam on the inside ply of the shell. Not for any particular reason, I don't know, I think it looks cool. And pretty much as soon as I get the shell in, I'll throw a couple spring clamps on, just so it doesn't keep moving around on the inside of the shell. And then kind of from there, start making adjustments. And I want to get it placed where it's going to be before I start putting on real clamps. So I'll do that now with the spring clamps, and once I've got it where I feel like it's lined up nicely, then we'll go back with the F clamps. When I'm clamping these, I usually start at the seam, which is the opposite of how I used to do it, but for this method it seems to work better. I want to make sure if I did get any glue on the outside, I clean it up now. So I start clamping at the seam. I like to take a little shell cut off with some packing tape. Put it right on the seam. The packing tape is just to keep from accidentally gluing your clamping caul to your workpiece. I want to make sure I have this seam lined up really nicely so there's not a little step on the inside of the re-ring. Clamp this down. Pushing the scarf joint together puts pressure all the way around, which is cool, but for me I feel a lot more comfortable clamping all the way around the re-ring anyway. There's just, wood's a natural material, there's enough inconsistencies that if you don't clamp everywhere, there's always going to be a spot somewhere where the joint isn't as tight as you want. You wind up with glue filling a gap instead of actually bonding the two pieces of wood, at which point you're just muffling the drum, which is kind of the opposite of what we're trying to do here. So that's one side done for both of these bass drums for Bath County High School. Once these are dry, the clamps come off, we need to level this edge of both drums before we can install the rear ring on the other side. The way we do that is just by bringing it back to the table saw and cutting it with our table saw jig. If you're interested in how to do that, I'm pretty sure we illustrated that in the last video on re-ring, so the process is just the same. One other little tip, if you're making a lot of drums or just working on a bunch of things and you cut a bunch of re-rings at the same time, one thing that I always do is if because I fit each ring to each side of each drum individually, so when I have this ring glued in, the ring for the other side I always just leave sitting on top of the clamps, and that way I don't mix them up. Obviously these drums are different sizes, but I'm also working on like 10, 16 by 16 rope snares right now. And with all those re-rings kicking around the shop, having them get mixed up would be a bummer. So it's just something I like to do to just kind of make sure that the different parts around the shop don't get mixed up when we're working on a lot of things at the same time. I hope that was helpful to you, and maybe this method will work for you, or something about what we just did you can apply to your own work. And stay tuned, because we're going to try and do more of these instructional videos in the coming year. So thanks, and I'll catch you next time.